Since 2 years, I'm looking into cryptographic protocols for establishing secure approaches to remote voting, especially through the internet. Now, when you do cryptographic protocols and you want to talk about it, you have slides with many Greek letters, with funny symbols, and it's really difficult to get all the people into one boat. So together with Melanie Volkammer, who was actually planned to make the talk here, we try to establish new models of being able to communicate secure methods for internet voting. And these methods we call, it's a collection of measures to establish trust. That's the way to communicate them. And that's a research project that we recently started. So we're not communication specialists. We still have to think about channels, how to bring forward these propositions to the people. But the first base that we established is to make the link between these measures and the security foundation. And that's what I'm going to talk to you about today. So first of all, we're going to think about why we need this at all. We're going to talk about the requirements for internet voting, which is derived from voting in general, obviously. And we're going to think about the threats that we have to deal with in general, but specifically in the context of internet applications. Then I'm going to give you a brief introduction to the measures, and in the end, I'm going to talk to you about the Swiss case as well. That's something that Melanie couldn't have done, so that's my own personal contribution there. So I think you heard a lot about the benefit of introducing internet voting. That's why you made this conference. One point that I can already relate to the Swiss experience is the increase in turnout. This is something that we're not able to observe in Switzerland, but this can also be explained by the fact that in Switzerland more than 95% of the population cast votes through postal mail. So there are already simple methods in place to cast one's vote, and it seems that the internet doesn't make that more simple. However, the internet channels that are used in Switzerland are quite popular, so we can see a shift from people who cast their votes through postal mail to becoming people who cast electronic votes. One driving power that you might find in your country as well, it's definitely the case in Switzerland, is the community of expats. The citizens of Switzerland who live abroad, they have a quite high degree of political power compared to their number, and they really put much pressure for the introduction of these systems. And you can really sense a strong political will throughout the party spectrum of introducing these systems, and we are in the trial phase already. So if all of these points were so interesting and there were no problems, everybody would have internet voting since 1995. The problem is that there are security difficulties that have to be solved. There are many countries, they try to introduce internet voting and e-voting with voting machines, and these projects failed. And these projects failed to a high degree for the reason that there was not enough trust towards these systems. And trust is something that lacked in the population in many cases. This is not the case in Estonia and Norway, obviously, that's why it was successful. But distrust is also, you can also find a lot of distrust in the scientific community, because the cryptographers and security experts, they tend to see dangers. And when you have governments who want to introduce voting and they consult these experts, they're going to get a lot of critical messages, obviously. And if you ask these experts, is this and that system safe, secure? Some experts might say yes, some experts might say no, but most experts will say, let's hope for the best. So, and this is quite problematic. If you want to create trust among stakeholders, it's difficult if you have inconsistent messages, obviously. And the measures that we're trying to propose are supposed to help at overcoming this problem. So first of all, what are the most important properties that you want to protect in a voting system? The most important thing is the correctness of the result, obviously. If you cannot be sure that the result is correct, you don't even have to come and participate. So in what sense can a result become incorrect? This can happen if voters cast more than one vote, obviously, if voters cast votes who are actually not eligible voters in a specific community. you can have a biased result due to election authorities that cast piles of ballots into the ballot box. In the electronic context, you might also delete. Authorities might be accused of deleting votes or having altered votes. And this is particular to the electronic world because it's difficult to audit. In a polling station vote, you always have people standing next to the ballot boxes, and they can see what's going on. And if you have enough credible people among these auditors, then you would obviously such attacks would be detected. In the electronic world, it's not so obvious how you can do that. There are security measures to do that, but the question is, how do you explain to the people what the benefit is behind them and why the system becomes more secure? So much to correctness. Then the secrecy of the ballot is also relevant to some degree in most countries. There are various interpretations of this term, but this is definitely one question that will have to be answered at some point also in Slovakia if this project is to continue. Then one third point, fairness. This is something that is inherently given usually in polling station votes. It captures the notion that there should be no premature results obtainable before the polling stations close. And we call that fairness because there might be only a fraction of people who have this information, and they might pass it on to other parties who might then have an advantage in influencing voters. Then the last point on this slide is receipt freeness / coercion resistance. This is also something that is commonly something that is discussed in Switzerland, let's put it that way, and commonly discussed in the context of electronic voting, is that due to the electronic equipment that you have, it may become much more easy to prove to third parties how you voted. So if some organization with lots of money places this is a constructed example, but if they may make an internet site where it says, sell me your vote and send me your receipt, and to obtain the receipt, please use this program that you can download from my site, then I will give you money. And this is something that has to be avoided, obviously. And in polling station votes, attacks of this kind scale much less. In the electronic context, you must always fear that attacks can be conducted unnoticed and at the same time have a much bigger influence on the result. So actually, I already mentioned most of these points. One thing that I'd really like to stress out is when it comes to discussing security in voting, you often hear the argument that even in the traditional scheme, there is election fraud, but generally you can argue that the fraud doesn't have a high impact on the election result. One thing that you have to keep in mind is that in the electronic context, the scalability has as much a bigger effect. If in traditional voting you have hundreds of polling stations and one polling station doesn't have a correct result by 5% maybe, this is not a big problem. But if you have an internet voting system with one server with all the votes on it, and you have one administrator who tries to do something to the election result, you have to make sure that he will have his difficulties. And for that, obviously, there are security measures to put in place. Second point that I'd like to stress is the problem of insecure computers and the insecure internet. Also, as a matter of scalability, you have to consider the risk that you have malware in the system that is distributed among the voters' computers who has the ability to change the voter's vote. So somebody wants to vote for candidate A, and the malware changes the vote to the candidate B, and it would be desirable for the voter to verify whether his vote has been casted correctly or not. And also for that, there are technical measures that could be put in place. So, about the measures, here maybe just a brief summary of some that we identified. We also wrote a paper about it. There are some more, and there are even more ones than, that are to be put into additional papers still to come. The most important ones, in my opinion, are the first three, because they're really related to overall security. So if you can explain to the people that you have a certain degree of separation of duty, a certain degree of verifiability, and you offer vote updating, meaning to be able to recast the vote and replace the old one, then you can make really strong statements about the security without having any funny Greek symbols on your slides. So these measures, they can be understood by the broad public. The foundation to all of these measures is transparency. You have to be able to communicate to the people. You have to have a website where you explain what your security strategy is and give experts the ability to react on your statements. I think I'll have to skip a slide. How much time do I have? I thought there would be it. I don't see the 10, okay. So, yeah, I'm going to skip this one too, maybe. I just want to say that the measures that we identified were related to 4 voting systems that are commonly known. First of all, the Estonian one. They just conducted the elections in 2011, as we heard. And we have the Norwegian one, who had their trial also in 2011. And then there are 2 more voting systems, Helios, that emerged from academic research. And the goal was to make a proof of concept for a system that is able to cope with these strict security requirements. And one, Polias, which is meant to be used in the industry just as one representative of this kind of systems. So first measure, separation of duty. The goal behind separation of duty is to take away the power and the knowledge from only one party. So if you simply have a voting server that has a website that enables you to cast a vote, then such a system would be really easy to implement. Any kid could do it in an afternoon, just make a website for people to cast their vote. The problem is that all of the votes will be sent to one specific computer, and the administrator in charge of this computer could, or actually will, have the possibility to find out who voted how. So the idea is to make statements, for example, saying that to the public, if you believe that out of 4 specific sites, you define 4 sites, for example 4, and you say, our system will only help at breaking the secrecy of the ballot if the responsibles of each site collude. And this is something that can be understood, and this statement has to be verified by experts. And if experts say this is true, if everybody trusts in at least one of these 4 sites, you can believe that the result is correct and or that the secrecy of the ballot is maintained, depending on the system. But this is a statement that could help a lot at mitigating doubts among the public and among the politicians. And also I can promise that if there are measures in place like that, there will be less questioning from the academic side as well, because this is as far as you can go. So security experts, they will have a hard time criticizing that you didn't take the extra steps necessary for that. And particularly the Norwegian system, they took advantage of making such a statement by separating the duties among 2 sites that are operated independently and far away from each other. Then second measure, verifiability. This is a security measure that has been introduced during the past decade in cryptographic research, and something that didn't really exist before. This is something that is really something new. And it captures the notion that in traditional polling station voting, people witness their ballot slipping into the ballot box. People can stay next to the ballot box in many cases. In Switzerland, that's possible, and witness the tallying of the ballots. And it's quite easy to describe analogies in the electronic context as well. And especially it's interesting to introduce verifiability for system aspects that are not separable in the sense of separation of duty, as shown in the slide before. For instance, the voter's personal computer. You cannot ask the voter to cast his vote on 10 different computers just for security reasons. You want to give the voter the ability to verify that the computer did not change the vote. And this is something that was done in the Norwegian system as well. So there's a certain experience in the voting community regarding verifiability. Then last measure I want to show you is quite simple. Vote updating. We believe that this has a lot of good implications. For instance, it helps at sidestepping vote selling. That was already pointed out by Tarvi. It can also motivate people to cast a vote, because you can tell the voters, cast your vote. If something doesn't work, we can explain you again, and then you can cast another vote until you feel everything is fine. Right. The problem is that vote updating comes with a price. You need sound authentication for that, because if you cannot authenticate yourself with a secure method, for instance through smart cards, you always have to fear that if you enter the credentials that allow you to cast a vote, a virus on the computer or some malware will also get hold of these credentials and can update your vote at your position. So it's a big question how to introduce smart cards and distribute them, obviously. So for the first part, I'm just going to have another slide about Switzerland. For the first part, the conclusions are that high security standards are necessary, but not sufficient for creating trusts. On the positive hand, there are measures for creating trust, and there are methods to communicate these measures. It's important to have independent experts evaluate the statements that we make in order to have a consistency behind the statements. One important thing that I should have said maybe in the very beginning, it is not possible to make a perfectly secure voting system, because the requirements you have are to a certain degree contradicting. So what has to be done is really to observe the legal framework, the traditional framework, and also the political setting, and maybe also consult the fears, the concerns of the population, and find out which are the real security concerns specific to your population. And then you can select the measures accordingly and build a system around it. But the trust problem should be discussed at a very early stage of the project. So much for that part. A few words, I think I still have 3 minutes, about internet voting in Switzerland. As I said, 95% of the voters cast their votes through postal mail. So turnout is not really increased, because this is also a quite simple method of casting one's vote. On the other hand, internet voting is popular in Switzerland. People use it. Currently, we're in a trial phase of internet voting. Right now, only 13 of 26 cantons have the possibility of allowing their citizens to cast a vote. And in the federal elections that are running right now, we only have 4 out of 26 cantons who allow their citizens to cast their vote. On the other hand, there are big political ambitions to increase the percentage of people who can express their opinion through the internet. But according to our roadmap, it is a precondition that the security standards are rethought regarding to all of the three systems. So the idea is to formulate minimal security standards that have to be met by all the 3 systems, and once it has been demonstrated that they're met, the idea is to increase the percentage of the population that can vote through the internet, ideally until 100%, obviously.
Moje meno je Marian Nič, som jedným z iniciátorov akcie Pravá voľba SK. Ja sa chcem spýtať zahraničného hostia, že pri tých výskumoch, ktoré máme k dispozícii, že či je nejaký evidentný dôkaz preukázaného fraudu alebo príklad, kedy bolo zneužité hlasovanie pri všetkých security opatreniach, ktoré sú uvádzané. Ďakujem.
Fraud The question has been asked a lot of times, and the problem is with internet voting that detecting fraud can be difficult. It can be difficult. If you really want to supervise the system to a 100% degree, then you would really have to follow all of the procedures that led to the wrong vote that reached the ballot box. And if you don't have the correct measures in place, you would break the secrecy of the ballot at the same time. So there's a certain intuitive contradiction between maintaining the secrecy of the ballot and ensuring that no wrong votes have been put into the ballot box. So It is known that in certain systems there are irregularities. It's all software. In the end, it is a software project. But according to my knowledge, I don't know anything about systematic fraud in political elections or referenda.
Thank you very much.
Ja by som ešte doplnil tú otázku. There was a specific question where there is a documented case of a internet voting fraud.
Documented case of internet voting fraud. Not in the political context. Not in the political context.
As far as I know, the Swiss, they trust their direct democracy, they trust their political system. How come the internet voting or the electronic voting hasn't been established on a federal level?
That's for political reasons. And actually it's also derived from the legal framework. The thing is that it's the responsibility of the cantons to implement the political rights. And if the Confederation were to develop their own system and give it to the cantons for usage, the cantons would not agree to that, because the cantons have a really different precondition. There are some centralized cantons and some very federalistic cantons inside the canton themselves, and they would feel that the Confederation robbed their responsibility. So that's basically the background why it came to 3 systems. There could have been more, and the Confederation influenced to the degree that it stayed with 3 systems and there weren't more systems.